Well, folks, glad to see you here. Welcome to my talk about my flight through the Devil's Triangle, or the Bermuda Triangle. You've probably heard a lot about it, and people think it, well, a lot of books have been written. There's even movies about extraterrestrials operating in that area. But there's a reason for all that. And it happened to me. And that's how I really got interested in it. And so anyway, I'll give you a little bit, I was actually a contract pilot for the British government when I was heading down to the Caribbean. And I'll get to that in a moment, but I'll talk a little bit about this contract pilot thing. It used to be, Hollywood called them soldiers of fortune. Then the United States didn't like that, so they called them mercenaries. Then they still didn't like it, so now call you a contract pilot. But still, if somebody in the opposite side, they'll call them a mercenary. And there's a lot of those fellows down there. So my first instance of contract flying happened in 1969. I got a call from one of the leading law firms in Akron. I won't give the name out. And the attorney that I taught to fly called me up and he told me that I've got a great job for you. And I said, I have a job, I got a business to run here. He said, yeah, but there's plenty of money in this. He says, the Defense Department and the State Department have approved this operation. Well, I got a little suspicious when they say somebody in the government approves it. That means you're going to have to do something that the government wants you to do. So anyway, I said, okay, might as well see it through. What it turned out, well, you can bring it up on your computer, the Haitian Revolution, and bring up Papa Doc Duvalier, the dictator in Haiti. I don't know if some of you old folks remember, older folks, excuse me, like me, will remember Papa Doc Duvalier was a brutal dictator that ruled Haiti for a number of years. And in fact, anybody disagreed with him, they wound up tacked to a door or a building, like that. And all the countries in the Caribbean plus the United States wanted to get rid of him. And so they were they're promoting a revolution to get rid of him. So I got caught up in it because it was a job that was going to be safe, and I was not to be involved in any fighting or anything because I served in 2 wars, World War II and Korea, and I had enough of that stuff. I said, okay, I'll do it, but I'm not gonna get into the fighting end of it or anything like that. So that's fine. What you'll be doing is flying medical supplies. So I went down, we're flying from the Dominican Republic into Haiti. So I'm going to make a long story short on that to get into my other flight. Well, I went down to the Dominican Republic and I asked them, why did you pick on me? The guy said, well, you've got a lot of flying time in C-45s, which were military transport airplanes. And I even operated about 20 of them in Shawnee Airways. And I had operated out of small fields. They said, well, you'd be the perfect guy because you got a lot of experience. Well, the money was great, but I said, what in the world am I going to have to do? I want to find that out first. They said, well, we're going to fly you to New York, and we're going to meet a man who's running this whole operation. Go there, and it's a big Haitian by the name of Roger. He was the ex-finance minister, and he was getting people up to, and I said, I don't want to get involved in any fighting or whatever. Only by hauling supplies to these people, and medical supplies. And I said, why do we have to operate out of a jungle airstrip? He said, well, if you land at the main airport, or any main airport there, not many of them in Haiti, then Duvalier is going to confiscate everything, and you're going to go to jail, and you may wind up nailed to a door. That convinced me. We'll fly out of the Dominican Republic. Well, the first flight was okay. All of the freight was marked United States or U.S. Army medical supplies. They were light, we put them in the airplane. They're all at night. we'd fly out from Dominican Republic into a small airstrip off the coast of Haiti. And there was no lights there. The only lighting we had was big 50-gallon drums that they had oil-soaked rags in, then they lit them. But I had to go case the place a couple times so I knew where it was. Just fly up the coast. And then they'd have somebody there flashing a light like that so you knew you're coming over the airport. And then they would light these big barrels. Then they outlined the airstrip. So here you're going into a jungle airport in the dead of night with gas or barrels that were your lights. And you land on that. Well, okay, no problem. Get there. They unloaded all the stuff. Then the next flight I had, I was waiting in the Dominican Republic, and the Dominican Republic was involved in this. So we were able to operate out of this big airport. And I'm looking over the airplane. I got a co-pilot, kid by the name of Rodriguez. I'll never forget this kid, because on our first flight, the kid's nervous. And I said, "What's the problem?" He says, "Captain, who are we working for?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you, if they're shooting at us, we're not working for them." I was really exaggerating. I said, "If both sides are shooting at us, we're working for the United States government." Anyway, he quit the next day. So I'm waiting there with a new co-pilot for the freight to come in, and now the boxes are heavy. And I thought, "Oh, what am I getting into?" And we had to shove them up forward because these were tail dragger airplanes like this. And they were good, reliable airplanes. What happens? 6 tall Haitians. I knew they were Haitians because they have kind of a bluish cast. And they were stone-faced, never said anything, just climbed aboard the airplane. They're all carrying M16s. I said, "Boy, I really got myself into something now." I said, "What in the world am I doing here?" We took off and did the routine, saw the flashlights going like this. They light the barrels up, land there, and I told the new co-pilot, I said, "Look, this is trouble. I'm going to land this airplane, we're going to go to the end, I'm going to keep the engines running, and we're going to get out of here real fast, because I smell problems and trouble." And he said, "Okay," and I said, "You get out of the airplane, I'm going to keep the engines running, but you go see that nobody walks into a propeller." Because if they did, we were stuck there. And of course, we'd hurt somebody. We didn't want that. So as soon as they go into the bush and get the equipment off, you jump in this airplane. I'm going to make a fast turnaround and take off the opposite way. Then I had turned to head to go back toward the Dominican Republic. And just as he closed the door, we heard shots. And they're coming from the jungle at the other end of the runway. So what happened, and there were 8 deputy sheriffs from Broward County in Florida, were in a boat. And they were in the invading party. I guess they got time off. And they're going to make a lot of money in this invasion. And nobody ever came out that there were actually 8 Americans in that invasion. But they were somebody ratted them out and they got ambushed. And they captured Roger, who was the guy leading it. He was the ex-minister in Haiti. And he was the one that was pushing this revolution. So what happens? I was reading, after I quit right then and there. And then when I got back to the Dominican Republic, as well, we made it okay. And the co-pilot said, "Yeah, look at the tail." And there were kind of bullet holes like this. I said, "I'm glad they hit the tail, or not the engines." Then I quit, collected what they owed me, went back to a nice, safe Naples, Florida. I had a little operation there, and then back to Akron, where I had a small freight airline. I'm glad to be out of that. No more contract flying. Because when they suck you into this thing, they tell you how safe it is, not exactly what you're going to do, but everything is. For example, nobody knows any names there. In fact, when I was doing more flying in the Caribbean, you go to a restaurant there, and there's foreign pilots there. There's Russian pilots and German pilots, and they were then what you call mercenaries. If a guy's going to have a full-fledged revolution, he hires these guys to fly. Well, I go in there, first time I went there, and they yell at me, "Hey, you." That became my name, "Hey, you." But you never ask names. You never ask where anybody's from. All you do, they were nice guys. And they're all, I was 61 at that time. I'm 92 now. I'll be 92 in 13 days. And so these guys were in their 60s. And they're flying jet fighters, these old Russian airplanes, old German airplanes. And I couldn't believe it, but they're really nice guys, laughing and joking, but you never asked a name. The Russians were all Boris, and all the Germans were Fritz. And I was, "Hey, you." So that was an experience talking to these guys, but you never wanted to mess with them in the air because that was their job. They'd go from one revolution to the next, whoever paid the most. So they're really hired killers is what they were. You know, that was their job. Anyway, we'll go back to what happened then. Then in 1985, I was kind of winding down my civilian businesses, selling stuff off, and my wife had talked me into retiring to Naples, Florida. And she said, "You have to retire." I was 61 at the time. And as well, maybe it's a good idea, but I didn't quite like the idea. So we had a home in Naples. I went down there, excuse me, with her, and I retired for 16 minutes. And I couldn't stand it. I couldn't find anything to do. So I got another call that came out of 1969 that what I was doing there. This was the British government. They wanted somebody to come down there to the little island of Montserrat. And I'll start the talk now with this is the airplane I sold down to the British government on the island of Montserrat. Montserrat's a little island, and out in the Caribbean, in the Leeward Islands. Now Venezuela goes like that, and then Montserrat is way out here about 1,500 miles. And they were in the Leeward Islands, which is the West Indies, used to be the British West Indies. And Montserrat, a beautiful little island, 36, very small, but you could see the British influence there from the names. And what happened in the 16th century, Irish and Scottish people, Catholic people, fled religious persecution and settled in those Leeward Islands. And many of them settled onto the island of Montserrat. Beautiful place, volcanic though. And there's a small runway there, and this okay, then, right, what I have here is, this is a story I wrote, it was in the Beacon Journal, February 29, 1989, about my trip through the Bermuda Triangle, but I had to sanitize it. You know, you don't talk about things like this. I can now, but you don't talk about things that you were involved in. There's no names, no nothing. You're paid in cash. You weren't working for anybody. You didn't know who you were working for. Well, I knew who I was working for. But you signed non-disclosure statements, and if you violated those, you're going to wind up in jail. And if you had a problem, they gave you a number to call. I call up there because I had a problem with an airplane. They says, "Is this Ernie?" I said, "Ernie who?" They hung up. So when you're doing that, you're on your own. You don't belong to anybody, they'll pay you good. And what am I getting back into? Well, anyway, getting back to the airlines. The trip to, there's Montserrat. And they had a small airport there, was about 3,000 or less feet, and was too small for airlines to go in there. So they wanted me to start the airline and hire the pilots. They had a chief pilot, and hire some more pilots, train them, set up the maintenance and gas and everything for the small airline to hop between the islands. And the Navajo I was just showing you I owned 4 of those at one time, and they're excellent commuter airlines. They carry 6 to 8 passengers, pilot and co-pilot. And then if there's no co-pilot, then the passenger would sit there, but they would hop between the islands. That's what the British wanted. The British were protectorates of Montserrat. They actually, that was the British West Indies. That was one of the colonies. Then they gave them the freedom. They formed their own government, and they had a government house there. It had a British ambassador there. So the British were actually paying for all this. So then I accepted it. In fact, the call for this great deal again came from the same law firm and the same guy. And I said, look, I'm just going no more what you gave me the last time. Anyway, I made a deal on the telephone. They bought the airplane on the telephone. And they wanted more airplanes, and so I signed the contract then to do all this work for them. Now they sent a man up to be their chief pilot. This guy lived on and with his mother, and he claimed to have been an Air Force pilot. He claimed to have been a Pan American Airways pilot. And I had one of the instructors, he's supposed to stay there for 6 weeks. I had one of the instructors, so he finally came in and says, this guy's terrible. He's got a faked resume. He's dangerous. So for 6 weeks, all this guy did was spend the airline's money, boozle it up. He'd come out to the airport to take some flying instruction, get there about 1 or 2 o'clock, and then finally he spent all the money that they gave him. Then he started hawking his gold chains. So we'll go on here, and this is when our route. I was going to deliver the airplane to Montserrat. And I'll show you here. Okay, the Bermuda Triangle is good from Miami up to Bermuda, and then down to Puerto Rico, and then of course the base of the triangle. And all of that is where ships, you folks have read about this, I'm sure you saw that movie where the 5 Navy torpedo bombers in 1945 or 46 were lost out in the Bermuda Triangle, and when they go in, nobody's ever found a piece of that airplane or any airplane that went down. They sent a big Martin Mariner flying boat with 15 guys aboard it to search. That one disappeared. And you probably remember the El Faro. Remember that container ship 2 years ago was going through the Devil's Triangle? I like to call it the Devil's Triangle. Sounds more dramatic. That was a regular run. It was 900 feet long, experienced captain. They left Miami with a load of automobiles and everything else for Puerto Rico. And then what happens, there was a hurricane coming in from here. And the crew, the other officers wanted them to change course and go down this way. But he wouldn't do it because it would cost them the company money. And then they'd think badly of him because he'd have to waste a lot of fuel and all that. Plus have to pay overtime. And so he went to bed. In the meantime, this hurricane continued on, and it caught up with these guys. And have you ever watched 60 Minutes? When they had the story of what they learned about the disappearance of El Faro, this huge container ship. And nothing's ever been found of that ship. But it got into this hurricane, and they had, on the investigation, they had on the PBS or CBS on the 60 Minutes, had the radio communications. And you sit there and you listen to it, and you bring it up even on the computer, and you want to shiver because it detailed these guys sending radio messages back about what's happening to them, and finally we're goners, and that was the end of it. But this hurricane was developing. It was a it was a Class C hurricane, which is 130 mile an hour winds. And that's what happened. This hurricane caught this airplane right in this boat, big ship, right there, and it literally tore it apart. And these people were calling in frantically to the Coast Guard. They had 100-foot waves. Can you imagine? 100-foot waves. How many thousands of pounds of water is coming down on that ship? The wind was so ferocious that, about a year ago, they got a submersible. Navy got one developed that would go down to 15,000 feet. That's how deep it is in that Bermuda Triangle. 15,000 feet down. And it had powerful lights, powerful camera, and it found the El Faro. And you look at that, then you shiver again. I never want to be in a ship or a sailor going through that area. And then they found that the superstructure where they had the cabin and all of that was ripped off of that. Can you imagine ripping this steel stuff off, how bad that wind had to be? And they found it a ways away, so that's how they determined it was ripped off. And 34 crew members, they never found the one, 26 Americans. And that was really interesting on 60 Minutes. Now, I wished I'd never watched the thing. Then what happens, about a month ago, there's a Mitsubishi MU-2 airplane, which is a civilian airplane made in Japan, was sold to into the corporations, used many of them in this country. A charter pilot, was coming back with a woman and two of her kids. All of a sudden they disappeared. They were right in the Bermuda Triangle. But on that airplane they did find a few pieces of it. But on the many, many ships that went down or disappeared in the Bermuda or Devil's Triangle, not a piece has ever been found of them. Well, then you get one idea that maybe the depth has something to do with it. The airplane would sink or anything, it'd be torn apart. And nothing would ever come up. At 15,000 feet, that's 3 miles down. Then, now we get back to, and I was going through that thing. I was on my way down to the little island of Montserrat to deliver the airplane and start setting the airline up. So once again, there's Miami. We're coming out. We took off, started out this way, and then flew for about maybe I had 6 hours fuel on the airplane. We flew for a while, and then I told this guy that I told him, you touch one thing on this airplane, well, I'm going back and get the lunch. You touch one thing, I'm going to break both your arms. That's about what I thought about his flying ability. So I'm not touching anything. I said, put your hands in your lap. And he sat like that. I get back to the cockpit. And you know what? I saw the magnetic compass going like this. What in the world's happening? Then there's a gyro compass, which you use in instrument flying. And that was developed years ago. And you put the heading that you want to go on, the direction you want to go on. And then you slave it into the autopilot, so the autopilot will follow that direction. So here, the gyro was going like this too. And then, so the autopilot was pulling us out the way the gyro pointed. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong because we took off on an instrument flight plan, 11,000 feet altitude. Weather was bad. Couldn't see a thing. Finally, we broke out right about in this area right here. And I looked, all I saw was the ocean in front of us. We should have been paralleling the Bahama Islands right there. The airway went right down the Bahama Islands, probably 5 miles off. So I could look out, see the Bahama Islands. All I saw was the Atlantic Ocean. And here we were pulled off our course by something happened. Now I'll get to it in a minute. So that was puzzling, but I wasn't puzzled then. I just wanted to get back. So I made a turn right there to head back onto the airway. And we lost everything, all radios, all electric instruments, nothing worked. All the transmissions faded. We had a radar transponder which throws out a signal and bounces back to ocean control. That is a green light in the airplane. It blinks. If you're there, you know who you are and where you are. That went out. Everything went out. So when we broke out of the bad weather, then I could see the Bahama Islands off to our right. Well, there we get this thing going again. You see that downward right there? So we headed back down to intercept the airway. And then we started turning. Our first gas stop was going to be Grand Turk Island. Then things started to come back. One after another, the needle started to waver and show that we're getting electricity back. And then before I got to here, right about here, I started hearing radio transmissions. So one military airplane and a couple airliners above me, and I asked them to tell ocean control that we're okay. I said, I lost everything. And these guys say, we lost everything too. One Eastern pilot says, I came through here yesterday in a different airplane, I lost everything. So what's happening? That's the mystery of the Devil's Triangle. And you remember that one movie, I think the first one about the terrestrials that were supposedly in the Devil's Triangle, where there are 5 Navy airplane torpedo bombers left Miami. They're going on a training flight, and they never reached they just disappeared off the face of this earth. How? Why? Then in this movie, they showed that somehow or other terrestrials got them on a desert. They showed that scene where the 5 airplanes were sitting on the desert. But nothing's ever been heard from these guys. They're gone. Now, what is happening? Well, let's get on a bit here. Okay, this was the guy that they sent up. I was going to break his arms, but you can see it's a pretty big airplane. The airplane I was selling to the British government, and right there, yeah, that's, I'm not going to name him. I don't know whether he's alive or not, but you just don't give any names out, because some of these guys get bad tempers, and they all carry guns. So anyway, that's me, and that's my wife. And she said, oh, you're going to go on a paid vacation. I said, yeah, do you want to go? She said, absolutely not. I couldn't understand that, because if I say fly, she's the first one to the airplane. But somehow she didn't want to go to that one. And there he is again, just to show you how big the airplane is. So it was a good airplane, easy to maintain, and I used a lot of them. I used the 4 of them at one time, plus the C-45s from the military. And there he is. We landed at the island of Montserrat. And this guy, this is a customs, immigration customs agent on Montserrat right there. And these people are just wonderful people. They're gentle, they were friendly, and they'd give you the shirt off their back. And this guy is lipping off here. This was the guy I had to have as a co-pilot. And this man just stood there and smiled and took it, but he could have turned around and said, get this airplane out of here. Right now. He could have chased us off the island. So I had to go over and grab this guy again to get him out of there. Then the trouble started. Well, here's, as we came into Montserrat, you can see what a beautiful place it is. We flew around, volcanic island, and there's one major volcano on that island. But even the Beatles had a practice place down there because they were away from people. Because there's the only island close was Antigua, 40 miles north. So that was, and this island right up here was called Goat Island. And I said, why Goat Island? He said, well, there's hundreds of goats on it, and they're jumping from rock to rock, but every day a couple of them fall in. And said, don't ever go scuba diving, because sharks actually go around there waiting for their breakfast or lunch or whatever. I said, don't worry. And there's another view of the island. It's just a picturesque place. Then there's the only hotel, Coconut Hill Hotel, on the island. And then there's the just scenes of the hotel. There was no air conditioning. They let big, I forget what you call them, but big slats, I guess, down if it's going to rain or anything. But there's a pleasant breeze coming through the island all the time. Then, well, here's where the trouble began. I was enjoying my stay, everything, vacation, I getting paid for it. I was talking with the people at the airlines about more plans on setting up and getting more airplanes for them and getting them started. But the airplane, I says, well, the airplane is parked at this little airport. And I says, does this guy have a key to it already? Oh, yeah. We went to see, I went to go to the airplane, and I'll back up a bit before that. I got a call after I delivered the airplane, talked to these guys, made plans and all, went back to Florida. And then I got a call about a month later. What happens, this guy had tried to fly the airplane, almost busted it up. Plus he was hauling dope. He was just stealing money. Saved. I said, you should have fired this guy. They finally fired him. Then I found a kid up in Naples, Florida, that was a flight instructor. They told me to find another pilot. And he's a flight instructor, he's qualified, he's also a mechanic. And he's now a captain with Delta Airlines. And he's starting out on his career. So I asked him if he wanted the job as chief pilot for this budding airline. And it may be a good deal. Oh, he jumped at it. So we hopped on the airlines, flew down there, and went out. First thing we did, went out to see the airplane. And this guy had stolen the headsets and tried to get the radios out. And he took some instruments out. He had stole some seats. So I told him, you get a couple of cops to go up there and tell him he's going to go to jail. They got all the stuff back, so now we got about 3 days' work, getting everything back, taking the inspection plates off, giving the airplane an excellent inspection. Because he was a mechanic, but I knew airplanes also. I didn't work on them, I just flew them, but I knew them. And so we're suspicious of the airplane, but we needed gas. There was no gas on the island. So we took it up for test hops a couple of times. Everything was okay, so now we're going to head for Antigua, which is 40 miles north of Montserrat. We get up there, we land at the main airport, and we go into customs and immigration, and they're very nice to us. And we have to go up and register with the Caribbean equivalent to our FAA. They gave us, we showed all our records and pilot licenses and law, everything. They gave us permission to fly in the Caribbean. Then he sends us down to immigration. I show the immigration guy, and he says, sit down. I said, well, we're free to go. He said, you're not free to go. Look outside. I looked outside, and there were police or soldiers surrounding the airplane. I said, what's the problem? He said, shut up and sit down. I said, what's happening? He said, shut up. Next thing I knew, there's about 10 or 15 soldiers or policemen come marching in, led by a guy dressed like a Marine general on parade in Washington, carrying a saber. At that time, I hoped he wasn't going to use that on us. Then leading them was a civilian talking into a walkie-talkie. When they got close, we caught the American crooks. Crooks, what do we do? Well, you're speechless then. He says, shut up. Then they put handcuffs on us and marched us out in front of the terminal building. And there are police cars, a couple of police cars there, and then there's a vacant spot. And he says to Corporal, where's my van? There's a police van he used. Corporal didn't answer. He grabbed him, where's my van? The corporal says, the sergeant took it to lunch. I thought it was funny. I made a big mistake. I laughed. And then here they got the biggest collar of their lives, the biggest arrests of their lives, and then the sergeant takes their van to lunch. So they put us in separate cars, lights flashing and all that, and they had some guards at the few stoplights, and took us into jail, separated us, put me into one cell, him into another cell. I couldn't talk. I said, what's going on here? Call the British government. We're working for them on Montserrat. The only thing he said was, shut up and sit down. And they called us every time it was American crooks. I said, what do we do? We're actually working for the British government. Well, what happens, I'm overnight in this cell. Well, when I first went into this dim place with a little window about that big and some light came in, I heard a cackling sound. And when my eyes became accustomed to the dimness in there, I saw a guy sitting there on a cot, long straggly hair, long beard, no teeth. And he's going with "You're gonna die here, they're gonna kill you here, and you're gonna rot." That's a real invitation into jail. That they're gonna kill you. Well, I didn't think it was going to be that bad because I thought sooner or later the British government's going to find us. Then he says, "But I'm escaping. I'm getting out of here." I said, "How are you going to get out of here?" He says, "You see that window?" He says, "When I die, my soul's going to fly out that window." Man, this is great. Anyway, the next day, a couple of policemen came up and released us. And then the commissioner says, "You're free to go." So the British government found us. They made APBs. They even had AP all points bulletins with the FBI in Texas. And because this guy turned us in, that co-pilot that had fired, the ex-chief pilot, he turned us in as stealing the airplane. He said, "Well, they're probably heading to the United States." Well, when you get an APB by the FBI, you got some problems. Anyway, it was all throughout the Caribbean. We're known as the American crooks. So anyway, what happens then, they told us we're free to go. So I said to the commissioner, this time I called him sir, and I didn't laugh. I said, "Sir, we need transportation back to the airport." And he says, "You'll get your transportation. Just go out there and shut up and sit down." An hour went by, no transportation. I went to his office. He said, "Don't you come in my office." He said, "Just get out of here. Get out of here. I told you you're free to go." I said, "Sir," called him sir again, "we need transportation back to the airport." He said, "All right, I'll get it for you." 3 hours later, I went back there again. He was hysterical, yelling at me this time. "It's out front. Go out there. There's your transportation out front." Go out front. There's a garbage truck. And you haven't lived until you've rode on top of a garbage truck in 100-degree heat. We had no choice. So we rode that back to the airport. Everything came out okay then. So then I decided that maybe this not charter pilot, but contract pilot business is not too good. It took me 2 times to learn. I got a slow learner. But any questions, folks? But that's a story about my flight. I got to tell you about the Bermuda and the Devil's Triangle. Not that I'm eager to get out of here. It just slipped my mind for a minute. But when I talk to Navy people, and this is the unofficial Navy version of what happens in there. Well, first of all, the water is 15,000 feet down, 3 miles down. And also that the Gulf Stream ends right about in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. And so the warm water ends and the colder water hits the warm water. And then the hurricanes, and this Bermuda Triangle area really has a reputation for sudden, fantastic weather. Now, have you ever seen a water spout on Lake Erie? And they show up and then they disappear. But they have water spouts, and a water spout is really a tornado. It's vertical. And tornadoes, water spouts out in the ocean have been clocked at. I don't know who goes through them and makes the clocking, but anyway, it's 4 to 450 mile an hour winds going up and down. The airplane goes in there, it's torn apart. A ship goes into one of those, it's torn apart. And that night when the Pharaoh went down, they had the Category 3 hurricane coming in, winds 130 miles, the waves, 100-foot waves. This was told by the people on the ship before it went down, before they're lost. So that's part of it. That you have sudden, and it's not forecast. You can't forecast the water spouts coming up like that, and the severe weather. The only thing you can forecast is weather systems. or thunderstorms or what. But that was just known as a bad place for weather, coming up fast. And if an airplane's in it, it's sayonara, as the Japanese say. Anyway, we had, but when I talked to this Navy guy, and he said it's completely unofficial, that the Earth, as you folks know, is on plates, and the plates shift. And they think that when the plates shift, then you must have some tremendous magnetic force coming out of the bowels of the Earth. They think, unofficial Navy version, that a meteorite went eons ago, way down, and when the plates shift, that tremendous magnetic force affects anything above it. Anything electronic, electrically, or whatever. So if you're caught in there, at that time when these things are, plus couple that with the water spouts, fantastic water spouts, and the sudden weather just erupting there, just erupting. That's the pilot's worst. You never go near a thunderstorm as a pilot. You never go near a water spout as a pilot, even at Lake Erie or whatever. In fact, I was flying a load of freight up to Oshawa, the GM plant, crossing Lake Erie, and I got about halfway out, and the weather was clear, and all of a sudden I felt the worst bump, and I thought the wings had come off. And then the airplane was turned completely around, heading back toward the United States. I couldn't believe it. And so this is what happens with weather. And luckily we have instruments on the airliners now that can detect wind shear and changes and all that, which we never had years ago. So what happens when the plates shift, tremendous magnetic force, the Navy will never admit it, then also off the coast of Japan, 25 miles off the eastern coast of Japan, there's an area where the plates shift, and every year for 20 minutes, I don't know how that comes out for 20 minutes, there's a tremendous magnetic force coming up. You don't ever read or hear about that either. The other one is over a Stone Mountain. Any folks familiar with this? You look at the aeronautical chart for Atlanta, Georgia, north of Georgia, not very far north of Atlanta, there's a mountain called Stone Mountain. And they have warning. Your compasses can vary by 10 to 25 degrees in the vicinity of Stone Mountain. So you got tremendous magnetism coming out of Stone Mountain.
This comes and goes, these magnetic changes in these areas, or is it constant? Is it always being interfered?
Well, it depends on the plates. We know they shift and that exposes it. But I'm sure they're trying everything they can to, but it happens. It's just a natural thing. You know, the earth plates are always shifting. That's why you have earthquakes, volcanoes. In fact, getting back to Montserrat, about 2 years after I left, they had a volcano, that major volcano erupted there, and there's ash, volcanic ash, all over the island. So the island had to be evacuated. So years later now, nature took its course, and it's cleaned itself up, and people are back on there again. And I brought it up just the other day that there's at least 3 tourist hotels on there. So nature takes time, but it fixes everything. Well, thank you again, folks. Any questions or anything?
I have another one.
Sure.
The commercial airlines, do they steer clear of that in the 30,000 feet up? Do they stay clear of that whole area of the commercial airlines?
Well, they're way up above the troposphere, which is our atmosphere. They're up in the stratosphere.
So the magnetic thing
Yeah, well, it may because, in fact it does, because when I was stuck in it, there's 2 Eastern Airlines captains that were on the radios. What happened? Any cosmic flares or whatever? You know what cosmic flare does. It disrupts all electronics. And they said, no, we had no reports of cosmic activity out of the sun. Another Eastern pilot comes on and says, I came through here yesterday and I had the same thing happen in a different airplane. So they don't know when it happens, but the higher you go, probably the less that magnetic force is. But it still affected these guys. Any more questions, folks? You know, if it wasn't a time limit, I could go on for a long time. I started flying when I was 14 years old. I'm going to be 92 in 2 weeks. So I had military. I flew the Eastern Airlines for a while. I flew with Capital Airlines. Kept getting laid off in the 50s, so just came back here and started my own. Came Shawnee Airways, and that was the best thing I ever did until I got into this contract pilot thing. Yes, could I help you?
Did you ever work for WAKR?
Yeah, I did.
I thought you did.
When I came back, of course, I'd been laid off. I had no money, no nothing. Went back to live with my mother, and I started a little flight school. And the general manager of WAKR came out to learn to fly. Then he double-crossed me. He hired my pretty secretary, and he married her. But anyway, he says, why don't we do something from the air? And I said, like what? He says, why don't you go out and fly around and tell people what traffic is and the weather? That's a good idea, but I don't have a radio with that capability. He said, we'll make one. So WAKR, with their engineer, built a radio about this big, that. Took 2 people to carry it to my little airplane. And so that's when I did the WAKR news report in the morning and in the afternoon. And it was a lot of fun. It was great for me because I got paid to do it and I had free publicity. And then my business really expanded. But in the meantime, this guy also says, well, you know, why don't we put a kid show on TV? I said, fine. What kind of kid show? Well, we'll call it Captain Ernie's Flying Club. And, okay, so when WAKR was up on Copley Road, they had their TV studio there, and they had an auditorium there, held about 300 people. So the show was live, and I'd have kids come in, have contests. I even had an airplane in the studio. It was a little Cessna 120. We took the wings off, towed it to WAKR there on Copley Road then. We put it in the studio, put one wing back on, pushed it against the wall, so it looked like a complete airplane. And kids would come in and we'd have contests and we mobbed that place. And finally, the owner of the station says, we got to do something, you got too many kids coming in here. So it lasted a couple of years, where I was doing the traffic report for about 11 years from the air. And that was a lot of fun, because it gets boring flying around. I was at a little airplane, flying around, and how many times can you talk about the traffic going the freeway north or east or west? So I'd make things up. Just to liven the thing up, wake me up, really. So the worst one was, well, these 2 bad ones. I would fly along the northbound expressway, and I'd slow this little airplane up to about 60 miles an hour, put the flaps down, and I'd say, boy, they're really speeding on the expressway this morning. I just saw a red car go by. That guy must be doing 80. And I thought that was great. What happens then, I land, the station says, you better stop that. We've had calls from guys that said, if he does that, if I catch him, I'm going to smack him in the mouth. I just got a ticket because the cops were waiting. So I better stop that. So in March, I came up with a good one. Well, I'm going to have some good fun this time. And in March, you have the Ides of March. You have the changing weather. You have the winds changing. And if the wind is in aeronautical terms, the wind is a certain direction, like north, at 10 miles an hour, you go up and 45 degrees, it'll swing 45 degrees to the right and double in velocity. Well, in March, you've got winds aloft at up to 60 miles an hour sometimes. So I had this little airplane, and I gave a weather report, a traffic report, and it was just about daylight. So I was flying along, I'd go over downtown Akron, I'd have all the lights on in the airplane, the landing light, this red circling light, the navigation lights. I'd get over Akron, I'd pull the nose up, and I'd stop. And with the airplane doing about, I could get it down to about 50 miles an hour. And then with a headwind of 60, you're going to go backwards. In fact, I was in B-29s during the war. People don't believe that. I'll tell you what they don't believe. We're in B-29s. I was in a B-29 during the war over Japan. It was the first instance of the jet stream. Nobody even knew it existed. The jet stream over Japan in the springtime was up to something like 200 miles an hour. Well, we're in this big 200,000-pound bomber, and you lift the nose up, and you start going backwards. You'll be sinking, but you're going backwards. So I could do that in a little airplane. Then what happened? Then what they say, you know what hit the fan. I do that, and then I'd shut the lights off. People would stop on Main Street, downtown Akron, they'd look up. The traffic had stalled in downtown, they're looking up at the flying saucer. Then I'd go to the north side of Akron, I'd make a real fast turn, and then now I'm going to do about 90, and I have about wind, maybe 30 miles, 40 miles an hour behind me. So I go over Akron with all the lights on. Then I get to the end, I turn around, turn the lights off again, and then hover over Akron. I was having a good time. When I called the tower to come in, he said, "Boy, you are in trouble." "What's the matter?" "Well, first of all, we've had our phone lines have been jammed here. And then he said, "You better call the police chief also, and the traffic chief. You better call the FAA guys down at the Akron-Kent airport." "Oh, what's the matter? What's the deal?" "I'm just having you had a lot of fun." The police chief, and I called him, I better call him and get him out of the way. He says, "You know how many lives you endangered? Traffic stopping on the highways and pointing up at the flying saucer." I said, "Well, I didn't think that was going to happen." Then a teacher calls from north, and he says, "I knew it. Flying saucers exist." He says, "I called the Akron-Canton Tower, and I had all 50 kids just tell the tower people that they saw a flying saucer for confirmation." And the chief of the station now, the tower at Akron-Canton said, we couldn't do any air traffic there. Everything was tied up with the phones. They were called to every place, newspaper. And the worst part was that people were stopping on the expressway and pointing up at the flying saucer. Who'd ever dreamed that would happen? But I survived it. But Mr. Burke, who owned the radio station, says, "You know, it's kind of funny." He says, "But don't ever do it again." We couldn't even get any calls in or out. Anyway, any questions, folks? Don't keep me up here anymore, because I'll keep on going. Then you'll be sorry. No questions?
Where did you learn to fly?
Well, I learned to fly at the age of 14. I couldn't solo because of my age, at the Akron Municipal Airport. And I'd go out there and I'd wash airplanes, because this was the Depression. And I'd exchange for these pilots to take me up and give me a lesson. I couldn't log anything like that, which I later did, you know. And I'd wash airplanes, gas airplanes. I'd get a dime to gas an airplane. That was big money back in the late 30s during the Depression. And then when I was 16 years old, I heard about the civilian pilot training program, where the Air Force, Army Air Corps, and the Navy needed pilots. So the government was paying civilians to learn to fly. And so you had to enroll in it. So I sent an application in when I was 16, said I was 18. Well, I got some flying time there, thank you taxpayers. And next thing I know, I'm kicked out of that. So I still wanted to fly. So I left high school at the end of my junior year. And I joined the Army Air Corps as an aviation cadet.